I spent so long trying to figure out whether or not I was Mom. Now that I actually know I'm me, it's like I have no idea who that is.
Unlike its predecessor, Steven Universe Future isn't really a happy or uplifting show. It's a show that consistently, episode after episode, punches you in the gut so hard that you've only just finished recovering once the next episode rolls around. And like us, the characters in this show are also taking a beating. With only under 1 week left until the finale airs, it's clear that the final 4 episodes are striving to deal a final blow. And what could be more devastating than Steven corrupting into a giant worm monster? Well, what if I told you that there's a very high probability that Steven is going to leave Beach City? Okay, so while this isn't the absolute worst ending that the show could come to in terms of consequence, it's one that's the most bittersweet. Steven Universe at its core has always been about relationships and the bonds that make them strong. How you can overcome great odds as long as you have somebody by your side to support you, and how you can withstand great adversity and pressure with their help. Garnet, Amethyst, and Pearl played a large role in Steven's upbringing, taking on maternal roles. Even though Rose was and is absent from his life, he was never without a maternal figure. Maybe they weren't the best examples at first, but at the very least he wasn't alone. Through their bond as a family, they withstood many hardships. Pearl healed and overcame her traumatic relationship with Pink Diamond, Garnet's future vision no longer paralyzed her from fear, and Amethyst learned to love herself. All of these things were only possible because of their strong familial bonds with one another. Whenever one of them fell down a hole of self-destructive or toxic behavior, the others were there to stop them and save them from themselves. Even when it came to dealing with the Diamonds, they were only able to succeed because of their relationship with one another. This was even shown pretty blatantly when they fused into Obsidian during the final fight, which enabled them to enter White Diamond's inner sanctum. Fusions are the physical manifestation of the relationships between those involved, so Obsidian's success here is just more proof of how close the crystal gems are. So the reason why Steven Universe Future hurts so much is because it's a complete breakdown of those strong relationships that we saw for the entirety of the first show. Instead of being open and honest with the gems, he pushes them away when he needs their help. They're all living their happily ever afters while he feels like he's lagging behind them. For the most part, they've all developed their own lives separate from Steven, and as a result, their bond is not as strong as it once was. Steven feels like he's alone, and he can no longer count on the gems to support him, and it seems as though part of Steven doesn't even want to get them involved because he's worried that his downward spiral will also hurt them and cause them to relapse. Because of this fear, Steven actively pushes the people he cares about away from him. But while Steven Universe Future may no longer be about how strong those familial relationships are at the moment, it is still very much a show about relationships. Though instead of it being about Steven's relationship with other people, it's about Steven's relationship with himself. Steven has and always had a very complicated self-understanding and relationship with himself. There's multiple reasons as to why this is, but the main reason is that for the majority of his life, he didn't know who he was. Even before the entire Pink Diamond debacle was even known, Steven was a hybrid. It's been stated multiple times throughout the show that he's neither human nor gem. He's something entirely different that hasn't ever existed before, making him unique and alone. This caused Steven to be unable to relate with humans his age and also unable to relate with the gems. No one knew how to deal with Steven because he was the first of his kind. This in large part was the reason why everything was so directionless for him. The gems didn't know how to teach him to be a gem, and he was too gem-like to be brought up by Greg as a human child. This created an unstable environment where Steven always felt like he was useless and didn't belong with either gems or with humans, since he seemingly didn't fit in well with either group. This identity crisis was only added to once his mother was brought into the picture. The more Steven learned about the gem species and about his mother, the more he began to question if he even was himself or if he was just his mother. Was he just another way for her to avoid her problems, or was he actually his own being? This existential crisis only worsened once he learned that his mother was not only Rose Quartz, but was also Pink Diamond. It didn't help that the gems for a good amount of time also indirectly and unintentionally pressured Steven into growing up to take his mother's spot. The Diamonds were also guilty of this, refusing to separate the identity identities of Pink Diamond and Steven until Change Your Mind. It was only until Steven's gem was torn out that he saw the truth. Pink Diamond was gone, and he wasn't her. He's Steven, and he always has been Steven. He was never his mother, and those who expected him to be were wrong. For the first time, Steven knew that he was himself and not what others perceived him to be. Unfortunately, that realization was 14 years too late, and the damage had already been done. Steven went 14 years of his life not knowing who he was. He went 14 years of his life being what people needed him to be and not what he wanted to be. For 14 years, he was thrown into a war that he hadn't started and fixed the problems of others. For 14 years, he never had the time to do the things that he wanted. He was either trying not to be kidnapped or trying to convince everyone that he wasn't Pink Diamond. For 14 years, Steven didn't have an identity that was separated from Rose Quartz's replacement. He never grew up knowing who he was, and as a result, he still doesn't know. He spent nearly his entire life being what people needed him to be and neglecting his own welfare. Even after the events of Change Your Mind, he was still too busy being what the Diamonds and the Gem Empire needed him to be. He fixed Homeworld's problems, once again putting his life on hold for 2 whole years. Now at 16, he's finally getting his life back, but he's finding that he has no life to live. His identity revolves around being useful for others to the point that when he can no longer be of help, he doesn't know what to do with himself. This is why all of his trauma is suddenly now beginning to boil over, because he's realizing that he doesn't know who he is. He thought that he did once he had defeated White Diamond and brought peace to the universe, but that was just the end goal that he was expected to reach. Once things started to settle down, he found himself not knowing what to do with his life, and so he created Little Homeschool to help Gem refugees in need, adjusting them to life on Earth. When Gems who he was close to began to graduate and he was being left behind yet again, he left Little Homeschool to do other things. He realized that he needed to begin living for himself, and in that realization and decision, he also realized that he didn't know who he was as a person. He didn't even know any of his hobbies, and that's why he took up gardening so he can experiment. He didn't have any plans for the future because for the most part, he never really had the time to think about what he wanted to do for the rest of his life. He was always focused on other people and trying to avoid a crisis that he never stopped to think about what he himself wanted. Then he began to realize yet again that he didn't know his identity even though he had thought he had moved past that. As a result, a lot of anger and frustration is bubbling to the surface in the form of Pink Steven because he's confused and feels as though he's lost with no way out. Pink Steven has always been the forefront of Steven's identity frustration. Even when he was first introduced back in Change Your Mind, he was there because White Diamond was convinced that Steven was Pink Diamond hiding in a child's body. His only speaking lines were to tell White Diamond that Pink Diamond no longer existed in a rather destructive manner. Even now, Pink Steven is around due to those exact same frustrations. He appears to yell at situations or individuals who continue to indirectly cause him to question his identity or call attention to his mother. This is a defense mechanism, since these situations only further cause harm to Steven himself. His pink half isn't trying to hurt anyone, it's only acting in self-defense, as explained in Growing Pains. Despite the Gem War ending and the universe being saved, Steven is incapable of moving on. He should be happy, or at least that's what he keeps telling himself. He can't be happy when he's just now realizing that he's lost and doesn't deserve an identity beyond Gem Human Ambassador. His entire identity was tied to Gem problems for so long that it was the only part of him that made sense. His entire identity began to revolve around him helping the Gem species and fallout from the war, that once all of that was resolved, he lost the only part of himself that he knew. This is why Steven cannot have a future in Beach City. While Beach City is and always will be his home where his family is, it's also where a lot of his trauma occurred. It's where Little Homeschool is. It's where the temple is. If Steven wants to find himself and who he is, he needs to be able to distance himself from the only part of his identity that he was ever allowed to know. And unfortunately, this means he needs to leave Beach City. He needs to put distance between the part of his life that has always prevented him from exploring the other parts of his life. He needs to do some soul searching and try and figure out who he is without the constant reminder of his Gem identity breathing down his back. Leaving Delmarva is going to be the only way that he can do this successfully. If he can completely distance himself from Gem problems, he can begin to heal and figure out who Steven Universe as a person is. Until he's healed and is able to move past this problem, he cannot have a healthy life there. That's not to to say that he won't ever return, but he does need his space temporarily. This is a trip that he's going to need to take by himself, since he needs to distance himself from Steven the Ambassador and become familiar with Steven the individual. This is why even in the title cards and in the credits scene of the show, all you see is Steven's car driving away from Beach City. It's just a little time, just a little something that he needs. He won't be gone forever, but for right now, he just wants to be human. And in order to do that, he needs to temporarily leave to find out who he is beyond his gem half. Special thank you to my top tier patrons, Ambrose Rothwood, Brandon Nunes, The Lovely Ghostly, Lee Taylor, and Zachary Ansley. Because of people like them, I can continue to make content like this. And I hope to see you all in the next video. Have an amazing day, guys.